Okay, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Thabang Mashologu, and this is Gaël Blondelle. Our talk this afternoon is about a happy or fortunate problem to have, is if your community project ends up becoming critical infrastructure. So, obviously the title is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but it really reflects what can happen if you get adopted at a scale that you're not prepared for. So we'll be using Open VSX as a concrete example of something that happens to a lot of projects, where you start solving a very practical problem for a community, and then one day you realize not only are people using the project, but they're depending on it. There's a real critical dependency on that technology or that project. And that's when the job changes and when the real fun begins. And with that, let's proceed. So in terms of the topics that we'll cover, first of all, why Open VSX began in the first place. And as I say that, I look into the audience and I see people who created Open VSX, so I'm sure they'll keep me honest. We'll also talk about how the origins really changed, and once it got used and adopted, that shaped the development of the technology. And then Gaël will talk and give us a sense of what happens technically, and then we'll look at security and also the broader lessons around stewardship of the project. So to understand the current story, you have to start at the original gap, the problem that was the impetus for the technology. And Open VSX wasn't created because someone or some people had a grand vision or theory about critical infrastructure and commercial dependencies, but it was created because the ecosystem and specifically the community needed something that they did not have. So, and I'm quoting Miro, who is in the audience today. Hopefully I do your words justice. But Open VSX started as a specific practical solution to the problem that was presented by not being able to access VS Code extensions if you weren't a Microsoft branded product. The broader ecosystem was adopting VS Code extensions, and more tools needed to have access to that extension marketplace. And that's really where Open VSX came from. In the Eclipse Foundation context, Eclipse Thea and other projects needed a dependable way to access these technologies at scale. And that's where the practical community problem or solution evolved in the way of Open VSX. It wasn't a giant platform strategy, and it was just a real problem that needed to be solved. What Open VSX provided was an open, vendor-neutral home for these VS Code extensions, compatible extensions rather, and it mattered to Thea, as I mentioned, to VS Codium, to Gitpod, and to others. It meant the ecosystem actually had something that it could build on. And it wasn't just about compatible extensions, it was about having a resource that was open, vendor neutral, reusable, and adaptable over time. Now, in the early days, the usage was much more human-driven. So people searched, browsed, and installed extensions. The traffic could be bursty, and expectations were closer to what you'd expect with a community service. To that end, when the Eclipse Foundation took over the management of Open VSX as a registry, we really considered it as a background service and a best effort service at that. Now, over time, that changed as more systems began to use the registry continuously. And that real shift wasn't just traffic, it was a real deeper dependency. And that's where the story starts to evolve. right? That's where it starts to get interesting. So as more tools integrated and more workflows depended on it, once that happens, you're no longer just running something that's helpful, that's a best effort, that's a convenience. You start to see businesses depend on it, venture-backed companies that are based on it, and enterprises that are relying on it as a critical resource. So the bigger change was dependency, and in fact, to speak to some of those examples, just a view of the different platforms and tools that rely on the package, on the public registry. You have a who's who of open source projects and AI tools and cloud vendors, cloud IDE vendors. You're seeing more polling, more automation, and less tolerance for some of the attributes and behaviors of a best effort service. No longer are you just having people browse the UI and clicking install once in a while. You're seeing systems and behaviors that expect it to be available continuously on demand. And just looking at some of the numbers, right? So we've seen growth, and I think Mike actually spoke to this in his opening day keynote, where now we're over 12,000 hosted extensions and counting. If you look at the year-over-year progression, it really does start to look like a hockey stick, where now we're at 300 million downloads per month. It took us a certain period of time to get to 50 million downloads per month. It took us another year to get to 100 million, and in roughly 6 weeks, we went from 100 million to 300 million and counting. It is an important resource not only for our community and ecosystem, for the Eclipse Foundation ecosystem, but as we see here, for other communities and ecosystems. And this growth continues practically unabated. And what that means is that availability is essential. Performance, it has to be highly performant and dependable. And then reliability and resilience are table stakes. So we had a critical moment in July of 2025 where we had an outage. And it wasn't just something that affected us and some community members and you know, within the walls, so to speak, of the Eclipse community. But you had people who came literally out of the woodwork because we weren't aware they're using Open VSX, who came and said, well, the system must be up. What are you doing to ensure that it's up? And then we explained to them this is a community resource. It's a community supported and operated service. And that really highlighted the disconnect between what we were able to do and what the expectations were. And that started the journey that capped off with the announcement this week about the managed registry, where we were able to coalesce the types of involvement, investment, and participation to build the infrastructure that underpins that service. And with that, I'll hand off to Gaël.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting that you have a project that starts as an open source project. So we were talking about that with Miro the other day. Like I think the project proposal was in 2019, and the very beginning of the project was yeah, in the next 2 years, I would say. And like Thabang just said, we more or less started this story by providing a couple of virtual machines so that Miro and the other type folks and Gitpod at the time, etc., and a few other partners could operate something they needed. But for so many years, it was just, hey, come on, that's just, we were not even thinking about it. And then the critical moment, the tipping point in when we have this outage. So I know that some of you in the room remember that, like you said. But then they start to call us and say, hey, it must be online. It must our business is depending on it, which is kind of interesting moment because when we do open source, we never know who is using it. And you never know when some people are start really doing stuff with it. So, we have very different infrastructure expectations from the initial moment when you put together just kind of a proof of concept or demonstrator that, hey, Open VSX is something that is possible, and because that was well designed, so APIs were open, and it was just the terms and condition of the Microsoft Marketplace that were blocking from using that in others. So having a competing or an independent marketplace was possible. And that really started with this low-profile stuff that stayed kind of low-profile for so long.
Mm-hmm.
That I think that I could say that in our staff we maybe at some point forgot about it until we had to look at, hey, we have this kind of hockey stick traffic, so that's going through the roof. We have the availability, the expectations in terms of availability are people calling us or shouting at us saying, hey, we are losing money because of you, etc. And that you cannot just put it online. It's also making a product out of it. So what does it mean? It means, of course, moving to a more scalable architecture, moving to also starting thinking differently, like we say here with resilience. So we know that we want this to be rock solid, and so we are going towards multi-region resilience. We know that it's not just about that it's out there, but we need to implement monitoring and other observability aspects. And ultimately, we started also to control how products were eating the project. So that was something that was put in place, 2-3 weeks ago.
Yes.
And that's really when the result of thinking about, we had an open source project, but now we are moving from hosting an open source project, having a working group around it, which is, of course, our bread and butter, but then we are moving to building a product around it. And it's kind of just like a fun fact. We always tell people that you should have a different name for the open source project, for the working group, for the product. And, well, I think the project is Open VSX.
Yes.
The working group is Open VSX working group.
Yes.
And the product, I think, it's also Open VSX.
C'est ça.
Okay. Maybe we could have done better. We need to, I think we are losing credibility when we will tell people that you need different names, but that's another story. At least it's important to see that from an open source project point of view, and everything we do it in the open source project. But from an open source project point of view, having the capability to control the rate of a specific IP address coming to the marketplace does not necessarily make sense. But when you want to build a product and when you want to be able to monetize access to the big players you saw on the previous slide, you absolutely need that. Because otherwise, they will say, "Oh yeah, no problem. We are friendly, etc." But that's really this moment when the value proposition is that, okay, you have those many requests per second in a sustained way, and that's we commit, we provide the guarantees that we will deliver that to you. Well, that's something completely new for us, and I think we are still learning. We are still in the learning curve. Mm-hmm. But again, that's serving the traffic is one part, and serving extensions is an interesting business because, of course, when you look at the marketplace traffic by itself is just API calls, etc. But then you have to deliver the blob. So we had to put in place CDN and all that stuff. Recovering well, making sure that when something happens, when we have something unexpected, we can process it, we can manage it, and we can continue operations. Because something also completely new for us is that we are now selling SLAs, and so it's a lot of engineering, technical engineering, legal engineering, and then in addition to the product engineering,
Financial
engineering, and so that's all that stuff that we had to learn, and oops, yeah, sorry. And then we realized that open source is good. Extensible systems like Open VSX extensions, like VS Code extensions are good. But of course, you read the news and you know that some people want to use those systems to attack people and more or less to try to get their bitcoins and other cryptos, etc. So it's amazing that at some point security became a very, very hot topic, and we were lucky to some extent. We were pretty well equipped to work on the security side, but still we had to adjust what we have in the project and how we operate around it, because to just be able to get rid of all the malicious extensions that were trying to come to our project. So that was a huge development in the project to make sure that publication is curated. So we have we are automatically checking for namespace abuse. We are automatically trying to spot. We are running antivirus or malicious code detectors on all the extensions, and also stuff like namespace abuse, which is something that is very common. And well, we have not only the software had to be adjusted, but also the team by itself. We have people who every day will go looking at what we have in quarantine and decide what we should do. Should we accept it? Should we just throw it to garbage and potentially even make an announcement about the fact that we need to remove this extension, etc. Interestingly, on that front, we were not better, or we were not better or less well equipped than our friends of Microsoft. I think that we had a lot of conversations at some point with them and we started to collaborate a bit with them on the topic, because they knew that some stuff that we were seeing, they were also seeing it. And we had all a legitimate interest in working together. Also, one thing, you didn't mention it, but maybe it's interesting to mention it, is that over the last few weeks and months, we have observed that initially everybody was publishing to Microsoft Marketplace first, and that then most people were publishing to Open VSX, and now they are coming to us. Some of them are publishing to us first, which is kind of an achievement.
Yeah, it's a fascinating turn of events where Open VSX, so again, this project and service now that has these humble origins, has become the destination and distribution channel of choice for these agentic AI development tools, so for a whole ecosystem, and that in itself is fascinating. I think there's a few reasons why that's the case. the vendor neutrality, the fact that everyone can come and it's a level playing field that's back-ended and stewarded by the Eclipse Foundation, I think that really gives people the assurance that, hey, there's an honest broker in the mix in the way of the Eclipse Foundation. And then, as Gaël mentioned, we have become a target like any other extension marketplace, packet registry, and we've had to adjust, and we've taken actions that are inspiring trust. So everyone knows that security vulnerabilities are proliferating and it's getting worse and worse. It's a multi-trillion-dollar or euro business. But the fact that we're actually taking steps, as Gaël mentioned, on a proactive basis, and folks in the audience may know that we launched a researcher reward program, reward and recognition program. All of these things matter, and people see that we're trying to partner and collaboratively ensure that this is a trusted and safe, I shouldn't say safe, a trusted environment.
Yeah, because ultimately everything we do in terms of creating trust, in terms of instrumenting the tooling for security, etc., is also stuff that we do because we don't want to make the headlines in the news that there was big problems in the Open VSX registry. I think that
now, to be fair, I think we'll make the headlines regardless. So if you Google Open VSX and news, you'll see that there's probably some security vulnerability that's being written about every day.
Sure.
But I think that's balanced with the fact that we're really, as an ecosystem, we're trying to, as a community, we're trying to take these steps.
Yep. So Thabang.
Yeah, so what does this all add up to, right? So a lot of headaches, maybe, regret. Did we do the wrong thing? I think it adds up to learning, right? And embracing the change and dynamics that, you know, for many of us attracted us to technology and in particular open source in the first place, right? Being able to ship, deliver good code that solves a problem in the world, and then as the adoption grows, as the demands grow, being able to adapt accordingly. And what we've seen is that you know, as these changes have happened, Gaël mentioned that the organization has changed as well. So we have at the Eclipse Foundation, we maybe had half a person, so 0.5 of a full-time equivalent resource providing support to Open VSX, and now that's grown to over a dozen folks. So again, this is you know what you see when, in our case, we've productized the project, and I think similarly the analogy is that if you have a hugely successful project, you're going to have to depend on more maintainers, on more committers and contributors, right? So that's probably an apt analogy, especially when you're running something that other people depend on. The nature of the work changes, right? So more discipline is required, right? So we talked about SLAs and the types of commercial guarantees that we are providing at the Eclipse Foundation, but just take, you know, an analogous project, right? If more people are depending on it, I think we've seen, we've experienced firsthand, many of us in the room here, these competing pressures, right? You actually want people to be using and adopting your technology, your project, but then it shouldn't be weighted in a way where, as a contributor or as a committer, you feel like you're working for someone, right? You'd rather be working with someone, right? So I think that's certainly something that we all need to contend with. And I think a critical element of that is communication, right? So setting expectations as to what the not only the scope of the project is, but how you will engage with those various stakeholders. And it's also okay, to draw the line. Before we went down this journey of creating the managed registry as a service offering based on Open VSX, we were at the point of saying, you know what, this is best effort, take it or leave it. And I think it made some kind of sense to us to make these investments. But then as project maintainers and contributors, that needs to be at least a decision point and a discussion that people have as to how they're approaching it. Gaël?
Yeah, well, so also one thing I wanted to add is that you may wonder why, as a foundation, we start producing products. Because you may think that, okay, the foundation has always told us that we are here to support open source projects and support working groups, etc. But I think that it perfectly makes sense that we position ourselves as a product provider for such an infrastructure. So that's because really what we provide here, we are in this position to provide it because we are a trusted partner and because we are trusted partners that will provide the same service to the different stakeholders. And so they come to us knowing that we will not change the terms and conditions. Mm-hmm. And on our side, what it means also that this move that you just described very well, that okay, this is open source, we are not your provider, and indeed we move from the we are not your provider stance to hey, we are your provider, we can be your provider of this infrastructure, but that has a cost, and you need to help us sustain this whole community if you want it to be sustainable. Because that's part of the drama, and when we say that it becomes an infrastructure, you may have read some open letter from other open source foundations or so, and we were a signatory of that, which is that, yeah, well, the world is building on open source components. The world is building everything on open source package managers, on open source infrastructures. And nobody is really thinking about how to maintain them. Mm-hmm. And we are lucky here that we found a business model that we start. So we announced with 3 launch partners, launch customers, and we have a few more that are very, very close to closing. Mm. So we are lucky that we managed to put together this business model that makes it sustainable. Because of course, what we did 6 years ago to just have something that was here, now having this dozen person working on the project to just implement this operating model and to make sure that the service is always there, it's something that has a very different cost structure, and to some extent. You know, we all know the famous the tragedy of the commons, and I think that what we can be proud of in this is that we fix the tragedy of the commons. Oh, well, let me be optimistic, okay? We have found a model that we think fixes the tragedy of the commons for Open VSX extensions, and. But we do that by sticking to our values of being an open source foundation that is supporting the open source ecosystem. Yep. So the open source project, all the development is still done in the open source project. The working group is still the place where different stakeholders can collaborate, and we have this reference marketplace that is indeed a product, and we treat it like a product, but is also sustaining all the developments for the rest, and yep. That is also not competing with some members who are using it here and there for private marketplaces, for example. Yep. So just another option about the title of this talk was that beware what you are asking for, because maybe your project maybe become widely successful almost by accident. Because I think that, I don't know, maybe Miro and you and your friends, you had this master plan from the beginning, and you were knowing that it would become so successful, but I don't think so. But the fact that you guys started it because you needed it for a specific use case, and at some point when everybody started to fork VS Code and needed to have access to an extension marketplace, it was just there, so everybody started to use it. And some people, of course, use it with more success than others, because when you have a project like anti-gravity that is coming on the market, I think that we immediately saw that on on the
Yep.
on the request number of requests we received per day. But then it's really well. The good news is that we managed to pivot our organization and to move from this, yeah, we are an open source steward, to, yes, we can put together a product and be a steward of this marketplace.
And if I can just underline that point, because I've been speaking to a lot of you and also people in the press, and the question keeps on coming up, well, why did you do this thing? And that last thing that Gaël said is critically important, which is that we view this as part of our stewardship, right? So I think maybe it was around the American or global banking crisis where they said it's too big to fail. I think Open VSX had gotten to a point where it was too big to fail, and we felt, and we continue to feel, that this managed registry and operating model, this financial model, is core to the sustainability, not only of the service, but ensuring that the project and the working group have the resources that they need to be successful.